Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Building Performance Hub podcast. I have with me today Dr. Anthony Greer from Talo Homes. Talo being this incredible Finnish company that are building off-site manufacturing. Is that what we call it these days, off-site manufacturing?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Because prefab was kind of the word that got bandied around for a while, and that got dropped out, and it's had MMC being another term. Do they all just mean the same thing, or is there differences?
I think so. I think maybe the most meaningful is we are off-site manufactured.
Yeah.
It's not that modern because we've been doing it for 47 years. So yeah, we default to off-site manufacturing.
Yeah, and so it's come from Finland. For those of you that aren't aware, Talo make homes that I think the claim is that every home exceeds the passive house. Is that the energy usage or the day-to-day energy usage? Is that your claim?
Yeah.
Which is exceptional. So you just build homes in a factory, and in 4.5 days, they are airtight, below passive house, ready for finishing.
So yeah, we manufacture in the factory. We come to site and assemble them. And let's say it's a 3-bedroom semi-detached house of that size. It'll take about a day and a half to install one of those to wind and watertight.
Yeah.
And then another couple of days to bring it to airtight.
Wow. So just like that, 4.5 days, your neighbour blinks, your neighbour goes on holiday, full-blown 5-bedroom house, now beside him, standing proud.
Yeah, it's quite a sight.
So I want to dig into that a little bit because MMC, off-site construction, prefab, whatever we call it, for some reason in the UK just hasn't, I would say taken off, but there's something about it that just doesn't, that hasn't succeeded. And I did a little bit of research before we came down and had a dig in. And there's a couple of pretty sizable companies that went under. And obviously, I'd never wish nothing but success for you guys. But I think when I looked at it, I was quite interested in why that happens. And is there a stigma, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask, about MMC and off-site manufacture in the UK that we just don't understand or get? Is there something that, I guess there's two questions in that. One is why are some of these companies failing? And two, is there a stigma? Is there something about off-site that is just people aren't interested in?
I'm not sure. I think the way I might look at this is I'd never really ask anyone to do an off-site manufactured project. Why should you care?
Yeah.
I think I'd rather ask people to say, what outcomes matter to you? So that might be, I think an outcome that we're basing our whole business around is enabling our customers. So we supply to house builders, housing association, local authority, and our scope of work is this superstructure. And our solution includes that with energy calculations, mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, and an energy strategy.
Yeah.
So for us, something that we're passionate about is enabling people to deliver homes where the occupants will never have an energy bill again.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? It's entirely feasible. It's not cost prohibitive. If you take it as a whole view and you make some changes to enable you to do that. So I think offering that is something I get very excited about, and we're now seeing customers delighted about that potential. And that's what we're delivering right now.
Yeah.
Whether it's MMC or off-site manufactured in the background shouldn't be the point, but it should be of exceptional high quality, I believe. I think there are some challenges that we've seen in the volumetric sector within residential homes. There are some fantastic volumetric off-site manufacturing companies out there. And they've been delivering for many years in sectors such as delivering schools, hospitals, hotels, and brilliant. Where the things you're referring to might be in where it's in residential and it hasn't quite taken off there. And then I look at the requirements of what that market might want. So the outcomes of a really high quality building, yes. Also, I think there's a real need for design flexibility within residential. Different regions have their own designs, their own desires. Clients have their own particular set of housing they want to build. And should we as manufacturers be asking them to compromise? And well, no, build our design, build this house because we can manufacture that. I think it's far better if we say, well, we'll build what you require.
Yeah.
So you're now doing higher quality, you're doing the designs they require, and we have to be cost competitive. And I think with those three legs of the stool in place, as it were, it really stands up. And that's our focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm keen to know a little bit more about the journey without it kind of coming across as a sales pitch. I have so many questions in my head. I'm trying to get them in some kind of logical order, but I want to know about the journey a typical self-builder would take, or somebody that has a plot of land and wants to take. But I also want to know what that journey looks like for somebody who's buying 1,000 homes. When they approach you, is it fundamentally the same journey? Talk to me about, if I come to your office today and I have a budget of £5,000, I won't hold you to that, and I want to build a 5-bedroom house, what happens? Do I go in and kind of draw a picture of what I want and you help me through that, or is there a bigger process that has to happen?
Yeah, there's a few stages in that. So let's say one end of the spectrum, you've got someone who's got a back of a napkin and they've drawn a house they'd like on it.
Yeah.
So we can then take that and generate the BIM model, and usually it's in conjunction with the architect. So architects are great at actually realising the vision of a house, spacing it out. We're great at the robust details, which usually architects aren't that excited about doing, and the marriage can be quite good. And then they come through to a 3D realisation of the house, which we can then go away and manufacture. It does change some things. So regardless of whether you're an individual or you're a very large organisation, it actually requires you to think about some of the details sooner than you might usually.
Yeah.
So, knowing where every plug socket goes can be useful because we'll cut those out in the factory and it saves time on site. So there's a different emphasis of when things happen along that usual work. And then we go into manufacture. So that's that 3-bedroom semi-house. So that the long lead items are windows and doors. So that maybe takes 9 to 12 weeks. And during that time, you've got all your site preparations.
Yeah, so effectively you're building all of the individual frames while you wait for the windows.
Yeah, well, no, not really. We wait for the windows. We've gone through the design phase and we're actually paused at that moment. When the windows and doors turn up, we'll manufacture a 3-bedroom semi-detached house before lunch.
That's incredible.
And that gets loaded on a truck and gets transported to site. And the panels are very long, typically. So the 3-bedroom semi might be 2 of them that you then drop in one panel, which will be the front of both houses. And that's part of the way it goes up so quickly.
Okay, so you're actually building quite large panels. So the house that we're currently sitting in the Building Performance Hub was built using, I'd say the biggest panels were maybe 4 meters, maybe a smidge less. There might have been 3.5 meters, give or take, and they were dropped onto site and bolted together, and that was pretty much where it was left. We bought the insulation pre-cut, which was quite handy, and we slotted it in, and I thought this was quick, but this took us a couple of months to build.
Yeah,
you're out there 4.5 days. But it puts me to shame. This could fall over, blow down, and you could have this up before Christmas at this rate.
Well, if you to do this, it'd be about 4 panels.
So yeah, you're quite literally building whole sides of a house in a factory.
And it'd take about an hour to put the ground floor up.
Is that different? Is that different from other off-site manufacturers, or is that just your specific method?
I think it is. I think it is quite different. Maybe some others do it, but there's reasons for everything. So the reason we're driven towards this is in Finland, the weathers are extreme. It's minus 50 degrees Celsius, or it can be plus 30 degrees Celsius. And in the winter, you don't want to be outside for any longer than you have to. And there's long distances to cover. So if you've got your panels all the way from the inside plasterboard to the external fascia, stood up lengthways along an articulated lorry, you can get a whole house on a single lorry, get it up in hours, and then you're inside. So there's lots of environmental things
Yeah.
that have driven down this way, which is quite hard to replicate coming from maybe a starting point that wasn't driven by those external pressures.
Yeah, I think I've spoken at length before in various discussions of mine where we talk about the airtightness requirements in Scandinavian countries, in Finland, where they don't do anywhere near as much testing as we do. And the reason is they know about it. If you have a leaky home, you know about it.
Yeah.
Because when it's 50 degrees outside and the wind blows, the air that comes in, is really very cold. So it's not. I think the UK, Ireland, parts of northern France, our temperatures are quite tolerable. They don't. Yes, we get some cold weather. Yes, we get some hot weather, but we're quite temperate. And I think that has been a detriment to the push on building performance in the UK to some extent, because the cold countries do it incredibly well. The hot countries, I mean, there's areas of Spain they just don't have glass in their windows because it's quite temperate. It does get quite cold in parts of Spain, but I think particularly Scotland, their push towards what they call passive house equivalent is slightly driven by high wind, high rain environment. But England, Wales sit in this little area where we get it wrong, but there's not big consequences for it. And that's something that's always kept us just in the middle of having almost very few regulations or loads and high-end build. We just sit nicely in that middle zone, kind of middle America. A lot of middle America sit in that exact space. If you look at places like Melbourne, Australia, they're also in that lovely temperate environment where it gets cold for a few days and they just tolerate it.
Yeah.
But you don't need insulation in your home because in Sydney it's almost normal not to have insulation in your home. It's normal not to have windows that fully close because why wouldn't you?
I think you're right, and I think the drivers have shifted over time though. So the extreme weather has always been there for places like Finland, Norway. And my two co-founders of Talo in the UK, one's Finnish and one's Norwegian. So that's their lived experience, which is brilliant to bring over here. And the consequences of the UK's weather is much less, but that's now been overtaken by a consequence of energy bills and the cost of living. So actually bringing in these incredibly high-performing building envelopes from Finland and making them UKified actually has a massive benefit that people do really care about now. Whereas, to be honest, if you went back 20 years, it'd been far less of an issue. If you went back 5 years, it's less of an issue. So now that's why it's become quite relevant to get rid of those energy bills.
Yeah, and I think at least in my industry, the building performance industry, the huge rise in electricity costs here suddenly made everything we do here incredibly sexy. The solar panels, the heat pumps, the airtightness, the energy efficiency, and as they creep back down, the demand and the phone calls and the press drop off because it's not quite at the top of people's minds. So it is interesting. So do you build the exact same spec as you would in Finland? I know we have different national codes, but they're not that dissimilar. We're pretty much the same. So is it the same kind of level of insulation, same triple glazing, same thermally broken doors and windows?
Yes. All the windows are triple glazed timber with aluminium clad, so they're maintenance free, and the doors, as you say. And then there is a higher spec of wall that we have in northern Finland that's just not needed or appropriate here. That goes even further. But yes, we build that. But I think one thing that's important to us is focusing on outcomes. And to achieve an outcome of let's just get rid of energy bills, let's build them really quick into a very high quality, it's not just a superstructure. As you know, you need to then have the airtightness.
Yeah, that's a nice link. That was going to be my next question.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I've always, these prefab homes always do incredibly well in their airtightness. Why? Why is that? Why? And there's another company I used to do a lot of work with back when I was out on the tools, and similar company, and they used to build maybe 3 houses a year. Very, very small company from Poland. And every time we went there, it was a guaranteed pass. We just knew they needed to achieve a 10, and they were getting 1s. Why is that? What is it to do with the factory environment? Is it because you have control? Because I still see that you have huge issues in going that low. And you're saying you're meeting these passive house specs. So doing that in a perfect environment. When we built this place, we were in a perfect environment. We had 20-degree temperatures. We were dust-free. And we really struggled to get down to those levels, given the perfect world we're in. And so you're telling me you put these massive frames on a lorry, you deliver them to site, they go through all the weathering and all the conditioning, back, cold, warm, whatever it may be, and then you turn up on site and you tape the membranes together and it all works. Is there more behind that?
There is, yeah. Well, we're very lucky in that the Finnish company have been doing this now for maybe 47 years.
Yeah.
And they build anything from, schools or nurseries to houses. And if you sort of normalise that to houses, that 3-bedroom semi, that's about 30,000 3-bedroom semi. And all the way through that's been driven by trying to achieve this. So it's product and process really that changes. So yes, we're in a factory, we're on a production line. And part of it is, so all the timber we use is completely dry. The sawmill's next door and the forest is just nearby. So once it's dried, it never sees the light of day or gets wet again.
Okay.
That's all the way
so
through.
They're not getting exposed on the lorries other than to temperature, I guess.
Yeah, so in the factory, it's all dry. The trucks reverse into the factory to load.
Oh, wow, okay.
It's curtain trucked, so it's completely covered. And on site, when we're installing that short time, everything is plastic covered, so it doesn't get wet. Yeah. So that means you've now got this superstructure that will never, there is no settlement, there is no twisting, there is no drying out period.
In my head, it's exposed timbers being delivered onto.
Yeah, and it's completely not. So the superstructure just never gets wet. And then there's lots of little things. There's thousands of decisions that have been made over the years that do things slightly different to that purpose. So the way we do windows, we don't create a hole and put a window in a hole because that's got a little tolerance around it. That's a chance for leakage. You have a separate line over here and you create part of the wall onto the window and then pop that into the wider wall. So there's thousands of small learnings that they've done over the years that all go towards achieving 0.6 airtightness as a bare minimum, just normal every day.
Is that your own spec, or is that a desire? Is your own spec just to still meet the SAP, which I assume, given everything you put into your buildings, could probably get away with an 8, which is the national maximum? Is the 0.6 just an internal target, or would you go back and amend if you didn't quite get there, or would you go back and learn as to what went wrong? Do you have a constant learning environment? Is that?
So absolutely to learn environment, yeah, and you have to keep pushing. And I think that comes under the culture of we're trying to get to here, which is eradicating energy bills, allowing people to do that cost efficiently. Therefore, a 5 or a 3 just doesn't work. And although we commit to our clients we'll make 0.6, but actually because we're trying to aim that target, we want to go as low as possible. So often we'll be down at 0.2. And it's funny, that shift from 0.6 to 0.2 roughly can almost half your energy bill. Not energy bill, your space heating.
Yeah. So this is something, now you're talking my language.
Okay.
Because the airtightness world gets a lot of stick. And we're trying to, if a building achieves a 5.5 and it needs to achieve a 4, it fails. Your site teams typically have one of two reactions. One is to roll their eyes and kind of not try and buy you off, but just not interested, pointless regulation, pointless test. And the other side of it mucks in and goes, what do I need to do? And the industry is still so split. I would say not the industry, that there's everybody in the built environment kind of understands and gets it, but there's a big split on site as to whether or not it actually matters, because it's with noise you hear your neighbours. If it goes wrong and you build it badly, or there's a mistake, or you miss a beam or something that runs through and you don't get that sorted, there is a consequence. And with airtightness, the only consequence is the energy bills. The whole construction industry, what I've learned from doing the podcast is there's a culture in construction that's not just about construction. There's a culture about human beings. There's a culture of acceptance. There's a culture of not understanding what you're buying. And we need to change the behaviours of everybody around the industry. Because the culture, if you think of culture for buying a car, is so different from the culture of buying a house. The UK average house price was something, I think it was 260,000 I read the other day. 260,000 is the average UK house price. We buy a house and we don't look at it or think about it, we just accept what we're given. Other than aesthetics, people will have your contractors out quicker than you like if there's a scratch on the wall, or there's a scratch on your fridge, that will get whipped out and changed before you know it. But if you buy a car, the slightest knock, the slightest noise, the slightest thing that's missing, we're straight back at the dealership, and we will make sure that they repair it. We'll get a hire car while it's being repaired. They're held accountable, because construction industry are held accountable. But there's just something that we don't quite have in construction, where everybody is just a joined up thinking. And I think the construction industry can do more, but the consumers shouldn't also accept what they currently get is the best that they could possibly achieve. I feel like I'm rambling, but you understand what I'm coming from. There's cultures amongst all the different trades, the bodies, the certification bodies, the trade bodies. We can all do that 10% better. We can all improve.
I think it's a hugely important point, and it's one we're passionate about, which is why I'm always talking about the purpose, the mission of our business. It's to eradicate energy bills, make the concept of fuel poverty, new builds, just irrelevant. And that drives everything you're doing. And there's a little anecdote which I really like. I hope it's true. I think it is. So when JFK, when he was president of the States, he was touring NASA. And he was chatting to various people who went round. He spoke to a guy who's in one of the corridors, and he was sweeping the floor, and he says, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I help put men on the moon." He was sweeping the floor.
Yeah.
And he'd bought in and lived the mission of NASA. We have the same opportunity in house building to say, what is our mission, what do we want to achieve? And then allow people to be incredible and give them the opportunity to exceed. So yes, we go down to 0.6 and we'll guarantee we'll do that. But I want teams that are there getting excited about getting it down to 0.2, because they know that's now taken off the energy bill, half that energy bill, or half the space heating requirement for that house, the rest of the life of that house, 60 years, 100 years, 200 years.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better return of investment of 2 hours work.
Yeah, I used to tell my team when we were on site testing, you don't work for the contractor, you work for the homeowner. And some of you that are still in the airtightness certification and the sound testing schemes that we run, the vent testing scheme, will have heard me say that during training courses, during phone calls. There's a weird, I was having a bit of a debate about it on LinkedIn, there's a weird culture where we're paid by the building contractor, but we work for the homeowner, but we all report to building control. And that, I think we're too far down the line to ultimately change the way everything works, but there's certainly some food for thought.
Well, I think I agree that is how it is. Our view is you can't change anyone, but we can say we're going to do this. We're going this way. This is our direction. If you like it, come and join in, work in this way as well. I think it's the most rewarding way to work.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's flip it slightly back to some more negative. I was ex-Strada, Timber Research and Development Association. That's a bit of my background, so I always have a little soft spot in my heart for timber frame. But the construction industry, as well as the consumer industry, there's always just been this little taint on timber frame. This little dislike, I wouldn't have a timber frame house or get blown down. Solid construction only for me. Why do you think that is? Why do you think, first of all, that happened, and then what can we do to change people's mindset towards it?
Yeah, I think that might have been there, but say across the UK, vast amounts of timber are used in house building in Wales, in Scotland.
Scotland particularly, yeah.
And more and more behind the scenes in England. So I think that it comes down to a quality point, and I think what we have to do is show people, and illustrate that we're not driving to be good enough. We're not driving to be the same as elsewhere. We're driving to be the best we can, and actually, it's quite impressive. So come and experience that, and I think that starts to melt away. And it comes back to my point of, let's not do an MMC project, let's just do the best project you can. And if we can't be cost efficient, super quality, and to your design, we should pack our bags and go home.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think back in the day, the timber frame did get a fairly bad rep. I still hear it quite often, oh, it's really hard to insure a timber frame house. And I think pretty much every building in this country has a timber frame roof. You know, the timber frame house, I suspect there are tens of thousands of people that have no idea they live in a timber frame home. Absolutely no idea.
And I think the timber talks about the material, but there's a world of difference between, let's say, a timber open, stick timber, an open panel that's put up manually, and maybe it sits out for 8 weeks in the winter and it's been rained on, snowed on, and then it gets closed up on site, and all that moisture is trapped in there. I don't expect the same outcomes for that as something that's manufactured in a factory and has stayed dry throughout its life. So you're right, it's a bit of a label, and there's maybe some justification for some of that, but at the same time, people have done work in that area and done fantastically well. So yeah, I think it just has to be showing people what we're doing, how we're going about, and what it achieves, and hopefully slowly will allow people to adopt it.
No, that's interesting. So why did Talo, Finnish company, beautiful Finnish timber, the woods up there are unbelievable. What made them look at the UK and say, this is we can do better here?
So in some ways they didn't. So the Finnish company supplied domestically. The culture up there isn't really about export and strong business growth. It's more about supplying the local community, delivering homes domestically. But then I think it was Nokia, was it, when Nokia went bust? There was a massive downturn in the Finnish market. And at that point they realised they were flying a single engine plane, and that was a bit nerve-wracking. So my two colleagues at that point realised they could take this out of Finland and take it to Norway. And they set up a Norwegian business to do that. And that's a smaller step in terms of culture, in terms of operating practice in that area. And then I was working in oil and gas at the time, and that was wonderful.
Down in Houston?
Yeah, that time I was in Houston.
I know it well. Galveston.
Yeah,
Spent a lot of time
course,
there.
yeah. So I'd had experiences of life, buildings in Houston, but also exposed to places like Mexico, Malaysia, Norway, Africa. And maybe it gave us a different viewpoint on business, but also the way of working very collaboratively. So all the science done was always with a common purpose, and everyone with all different skills, competencies were working together to achieve that purpose. And I realised it was an opportunity because I knew my two co-founders, Bent and Leona. We saw as an opportunity to actually bring this technology and bring it to the UK, where there's a massive need in fuel poverty, there's a massive undersupply of housing, which we all know. And for me, it was a chance to do something that I felt had a deeper meaning to me than necessarily finding the last drops of oil. So that's when we then decided to...
Big shift
for myself personally. And then we set up a UK company that then started bringing the product in from Finland.
Fantastic. What would, if I was to ask somebody from the UK building company, medium-sized building company, what they would think about your company, what do you think they would say? Just an average. Do you think they'd be impressed? Do you think they'd feel threatened? Do you think they would be on board? Do you think they'd be indifferent? So
I think if we've got past the point where they can look and understand what we do, I think there's a few things. We take out a vast amount of uncertainty and risk in a project. So it's really quite attractive. From getting your foundations in.
Risk is something I learned about recently with contractor. Well, not recently, but I've dug more and more into how building contractors look at risk. And something we can have a good chat with Tony Battle about. It's a little bit about risk and how they manage that. Sorry, yeah.
So I think that's seen as a benefit. Also, we're not turnkey. We're not trying to do everything. So we're supporting the follow-on trades that come after us to work in a nicer environment. That's precision, easier for them to work with. So that's quite supportive as well. The speed of the journey reduces dramatically. That's also really beneficial if they're looking at their development costs, their prelims. So I do think there's trepidation as well. When anyone does something different for the first time, it's natural to be slightly uncertain. How is it going to look? So we've got quite a role of helping people through that the first time. But I think once they've done it, it'd be hard for them to then go, okay, why won't I want to do this again?
You touched on something there that I've spoke about already on the podcast with Lee and Paul, which is about working in controlled environments. And we had a brief chat about it just before we went live. And it's something I think that the construction industry needs to have a think about, and how it can improve and adapt, because there's a generation of people coming through that have just grown up very differently to how we've grown up, and the outside isn't as attractive to them. And I discussed with Lee and Paul, construction's an iceberg, and we only ever see the 10% that's on top. We only ever see the high vis and the cranes, but actually 90% of construction is actually not on site.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're trying to get that down to 95%. But I think there's definitely lessons and there's things we need to think about when we with offsite manufacturing, and the benefits of getting people to work in climate-controlled, guaranteed, safe conditions. And I'd be interested on your thoughts on, is that the future, or what are the benefits for it?
I think it's a really good point in that, in the factory environment, everything's calm, it's well ordered, it's mixes of ages, sexes, any other background. It's an environment where hopefully you're in an organisation that can support your career growth. Yeah. So you start to look like other industries. And then I think we've got something that's really wonderful in our house building business, in that we're working on something which has so much meaning to our customers. There's pretty much nothing else that has as much meaning to someone than their home. So we have the opportunity to create an environment where people come into this industry, have a lovely working environment, and can care about something deeply. And it's much easier to care about providing someone a home, removing energy bills, than it is maybe about manufacturing some sugar or something that's less connected to people.
Excellent. When you talk about reducing energy bills, excuse me, I'm interested to know how you do that. Do you do that on a net energy basis? So you're still connected to the grid, and you oversupply in the summer and undersupply in the winter to balance out over the course of a year? Mm-hmm. Or do you go full solar panel, full batteries, and are still connected to the grid? Obviously, the energy usage is incredibly low, but you still need to use energy.
Yeah,
we're not quite there. How is it you're able? Is it net energy zero?
Yeah, it is. So you're right. The fabric needs to be massively performing to reduce the space heating. You've still got a load, but the energy philosophy changes. So because your space heating is so minimal, you don't need air source heat pumps. Obviously, you don't use gas because you're using so little energy. You never get the benefit of that. So instead, you spend that money on some solar and a battery, not particularly massive battery, and just use electric underfloor heating, which we wince at because they think, gosh, that's going to be expensive. When you look at the numbers, you're putting so little energy, you're only using it for a couple of months of the year. That becomes really economic, and all that's paid for by effectively the solar gains. So yes, in winter you might still be connected to the grid and need to download a little bit, but over the summer you're way out producing. And over net, you should be an energy generator rather than an energy user. Interesting.
So I know there's a conversation I've not yet had. There's a guy I really want to get onto the podcast that's quite out there on LinkedIn that's quite anti-solar and anti-wind farms because of the oversupply issues. If you look towards California, they have incredible oversupply, so much so that they're giving away free electricity during the day, and people are charging their cars at work so that they can take that energy home for free because there's so many solar panels that there's an oversupply. Is that something you're worried about, or I know you size them correctly, but if every house in this country, which I know a lot of people say every house in the country should have a solar panel, if we did that, we would blow the national grid to smithereens. What is it? Is it the answer, or I guess what I'm trying to say is, should we be putting solar panels on every house and working on the basis of an oversupply, or is it better to try and avoid that?
I'm not sure I know the answer for the macro, but I think it needs to be looked holistically. So, yes, solar panel I think can be useful. A battery and your hot water is load balancing. So when you're oversupplying, actually fill up your battery. When you heat up your hot water while you can. If you need to put heat in, we put heat into the ground floor slab. So that's another load balancing and a thermal mass you can control. So yeah, use your load balancing to capture that, and then every house now needs to have a car charging point. So if that continues, that people use electric cars, there's a whole other load balancing that you'd use. And it depends, I think this is a really interesting and active space. So there are parties out there that are now looking at, say you're doing 50 homes on a site, well they're all connected in some way. So you can load balance against each other as well.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not sure I know the full answer. I think it's part of the answer, solar and battery. And it needs to be looked holistic at what their requirements are, with challenges like oversupply in mind.
Yeah, I'd love to get a podcast on and talk about solar and battery storage. So I'm going to try and nail some people.
Yeah, that'd be great.
One of the things I guess about your homes, Talo's homes, is you make them super airtight, you make them super energy efficient. Surely you're suffocating people, right? That's an airtightness issue. You make them buildings need to breathe, right?
Yeah, they do. And actually the ventilation is a critical point and something we mandate with our homes. So every home has to come with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery.
And what's the benefit of MVHR?
Well, you spend energy heating the home within your house, and you need ventilation for fresh air to come in, keep the CO2 levels down, keep moisture down, prevent mold and all those good things. And with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, you're now controlling the extraction of that air and controlling the input of fresh air. So I hope it's not windy outside. I hope it's windy outside so I get some ventilation. You know there's going to be ventilation every day of the year, and you know how much. But as well as changing the air, it goes through a heat exchange unit, and it pre-warms the air coming in from the air going out.
Yep.
So you're recovering about 95%. So it just reduces your energy load. You've heated that air once, don't waste that heat. And then finally, you've got the opportunity now to put further control on your air. You can filter it. So you can take out particulates, you can take out pollen. So it further increases your air is warm, and you've got proper ventilation, and now you're taking out some of the pollutants that might be coming from the road that's just next to your house.
Yeah.
It's not that costly, and when you put it in that sort of whole house view of all the changes you're making with your energy strategy, it's something we insist upon, and every house we deliver will have one.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. The English, at least, building regulations approved document F say that air that comes into a building should be filtered. But then it goes on to give a bunch of ventilation strategies where there is no filtering of the air that comes into our homes, which could come from a road, it could come from pollution. And I know there's some great initiatives. We've had Lisa on the podcast talking about healthy homes and her experience with asthma. We also have Rosamund Roberta coming on, and Rosamund, whose daughter was the first person to have pollution as a cause of death on her certificate. Very, very sad story. And Rosamund, who I met recently at the BISA conference, she's going to come on the podcast, going to have a chat, and that will be a really good one.
Sure.
But she's talking about the work she's doing about indoor and outdoor air pollution. And she's made it to the top of government and back down, leaving no stone unturned. So
Brilliant.
Air pollution, mold, these things are incredible, and you can control that with a super airtight environment. But you can't control that if you put an MVHR on a leaky building, you're still not controlling the humidity ingress and locations of the humidity ingress. So building that building fabric to be nice and airtight, very well insulated to avoid the heat transfer, and then turning over the air to get rid of mold spores, to get rid of cooking gases and all of the stuff that is in some of the building products that we use is incredibly important.
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah. We always end the podcast with the same 3 questions. So I'm going to ask you the standard 3 questions, and the audience can judge how they compare, and it's completely your thoughts.
Okay.
Very first question, what do the words building performance mean to you?
It means to me living in a home where the thought of worrying about your energy bill is gone. You now don't constantly wonder about whether the heating's on or off, because it's always at the right temperature. It's always comfortable. And you almost forget about the performance.
Okay. So you've got an emphasis on reducing the cost, increase the comfort, and therefore improve health, I guess?
Yeah, improving health. So you've got it now, by default, you've got a healthy, warm, living environment which isn't costing you the earth.
Yeah, interesting. It's very similar to my own thoughts. I've always been impressed with how everybody thinks about those same questions a little bit differently. Second question, who's inspiring you right now?
Founders, the leaders of businesses have gone before us.
Okay.
So there's this wonderful podcast series, which I'll give a shout out. It's called the Founders Podcast. And it's a chap who's goes away and reads biographies of founders. And by founders, I mean, it might be Napoleon, it might be Elon Musk, or anything in between. And has distilled them into the learnings and what they've learned through their careers. And you can listen to it in a half an hour, 45 minutes. And it's inspiring me daily. It's brilliant.
Oh, great. We'll put a link down below, Founders Podcast, and make sure we give you a shout out on that. Final question: if you could change one thing in the construction industry right now, today, you can click your fingers and you make a law, you change a culture, you do one thing. What's the first thing you do?
I think when I look at the way we procure and work together in construction, it's very different to what I've seen in other industries. It's kind of it seems to me quite hierarchical. So you've got a client that goes to maybe a principal contractor, that then goes down to a subcontractor, might be a timber frame. And it's really hard within that to focus on outcomes, which we care about. It's hard to focus on create spaces for innovation to come. And it can only really be driven by just meeting a regulation. I'd click my fingers and change it to a culture of much more collaborative working. So at the centre there's a shared vision for a project, which is focused on the outcomes of who's going to live in these homes, what matters to them. And all the stakeholders are sat around together saying, well, actually, how do we achieve that together? And this now starts to create places where innovation can work, whether it's technology or just the way we work together. That would make a massive change. And that's the way we'd like to work, and love to find people who work like that, but I know it's not the default way of working. So my change would be that.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. Well, we'll put a link down to Talo, we'll put a link down to your LinkedIn page, and thank you so much for coming and having a chat with us.
My pleasure, thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Cheers.